Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Friday, August 7th, 2026, episode 567, Tucker's 10-point manifesto, America's Future. So I'm just going to go over the 10 points of Tucker Carlson's manifesto. I don't know if it's Tucker Carlson's manifesto, but it's the that group of people who got together to talk about the future, a possibility of a third party. Marjorie Taylor Greene said that she tried to get Tucker Carlson to be the candidate for this new party. But whatever the intent, whatever is the goal, they just published this 10-point manifesto outlining basically what they're striving for, what their goal is. And I think it's probably something that's appealing to most people, a lot of the independent voters who now hold the majority of the voting population here in the United States. So it's worth a look. Before I begin, but Ron Paul, I know, talked about it yesterday, and I listened to his episode, and his whole one of the things that he would always say is that, hey, how about a second party? And of course, he's referring to the problem of the uni party, Demopublicans, Republicrats, that is the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, are basically two sides of the same coin. It's not that they're opposite. It's not that they're at odds with each other, but they're engaged in a sort of WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment Corporation thing, where they pretend to be adversaries, and maybe they fight about certain things on the edges, but essentially the core is the same. And you can tell because AIPAC, the Jewish Special Interest Group, lobbies both sides. So it's not just one against the other, but it's a core of people who are unified uh, to and loyal to the system itself, not to the American people. And so the Unity Party is basically the system. And what Tucker Carlson is trying to propose, whether it's going to come out of the Republican Party, whether it's going to be an independent third party, remains to be seen. I don't know how they're going to do it, especially considering that, as I said before, the election process itself is so deeply rigged to prevent the emergence of a third party. So here it is. Now you got 10 points. And so I'm just going to go through the 10 points and just say one or two things about each point. And this should move pretty quickly. So the first point is he wants fair, right? So the headline is fair. The same rules must apply to presidents, federal agents, and elites, such as Jeffrey Epstein, whose impunity Carlson cast as emblematic of an Epstein class enriching itself through a corrupt system. So when he says fair, he means justice, of course. And I wish that he used justice, but maybe there's some kind of legal implication there that he wants to distance himself from. So justice has to be enforced or extended to everybody in power. But I would also argue the reason why you want fairness or justice is because the so-called oppressed these days are getting a free pass. Criminals getting let out of prison, rapists who are let out of prison so they can rape again. So illegal immigration, uh, you have looting, you have a lot of serious crimes being committed uh, and without harsh punishments, or even people who murder other people. And then the family of the murderer comes out and says, this system is unfair. He shouldn't be put in prison for murdering someone. And this is weird. So justice, yeah, I think a lot of people can get behind that. And the only people, of course, who would not are the criminals themselves, of course. Second point is sovereign. Carlson claimed Israel pushed the U.S. into the Iran war through bribery or threat or both. while describing foreign lobbying, corporate control of government, and high interest debt as forms of slavery. Of course, it's slavery. Coercion is slavery. But it's not that the government is enslaved, it is that the people of America are enslaved, whether whether enslaved by Israel, it's the Epstein class, right? So it's people who are colluding with Israel to allow all of this ridiculousness to happen here in the United States. Now, remember, the Russia collusion was a hoax, but nothing is really being said about the APAC or the Israel influence in the US. I mean, come on, Thomas Massie, Israel spent $30 million to unseat him. If that's not election interference, I don't know what it is. The next point, the third point, productive. America should rebuild farming, manufacturing, and craftsmanship while rejecting an economy dominated by finance, real estate speculation, surveillance systems, and weapons. Yes, yes, and yes. However, the US government has nothing to do with it, right? In the sense of rebuilding. The US just has to downsize the bureaucratic state. All of those federal agencies, which are in control of manufacturing, farming, trade, all of this stuff, you get rid of that. And the financial sector then starts to implode because you can no longer, uh, you know, manipulate and control the markets. You have to have something solid in hand. It's no longer all about the paper, trading in futures, trading in paper contracts. No, now you have to actually do the physical aspect of it. And most people are familiar that the speculation or the futures trading often manipulates what happens in reality. Just for an example, the oil price, a lot of people, from what I understand, a lot of oil prices that people are quoting to say, oh, yeah, oil is going down in price or oil going up in price is the paper price. It's the what is being traded on the stock market, which is heavily manipulated. When in reality, when ships are offloading their oil, the crude oil, the price of each barrel is much, much higher than the paper price that is traded on the stock exchange. So all the United States has to do is downsize the bureaucratic state and all of those other organizations that are dependent on the existence of a bureaucratic state. All of that has to at least reform, right? Think how it goes about doing business, or just simply disappears. The next point is beautiful. It just says beautiful. Carlson alleged that urban planners deliberately uglified American cities and portrayed brutalist architecture, graffiti, public drug use, and violent crime as deliberate attacks on the public. So beauty is subjective. It's in the eyes of the beholder. But right, so if I own a building and I want graffiti and a graffiti artist to put graffiti on the side, that's my choice. But that's not what he's talking about, right? He's talking about slums. He's talking about homeless tent cities in cities, this kind of thing. This is, of course, deliberate, right? It is allowed to happen. It is, in some cases, fostered, but all of this is the result of corruption, corruption on all fronts, every aspect of city life for power. And the result of that struggle for power is that it pushes productive people out. Even my local town, which is not in a big city, but my local town, there was a big push. Unfortunately, I know a lot of them. There was a big push to have Democrats elected to the. We don't have a mayor; we have I forget, township board or whatever. And they took over. Democrats took over, and the very first thing they did was increase spending by hiring more administrators. And if you know how the system works, when you hire a new like superintendent or whatever, they want to bring their friends. And in order to bring all of their friends, you need to create more positions, more jobs. And so, whereas before there was no assistant superintendent, now there is. Now there's two. And they need to have assistants as well. So it's this ridiculous spending for spending's sake, just so that their friends could have a job. Their incompetent friends who know nothing can also have a job at our expense with no improvement in service. In fact, I would even argue with a decline in the quality of service. So this means that money that is normally set aside for certain programs, for certain, um, you know, uh, events that happen in your township are no longer funded, and they are replaced by fewer maintenance uh, personnel, fewer activities, fewer events. And so you begin to see a decline in your neighborhood. And that, on the microcosm, that's what you see. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about it because I'm a pastor here. And so I can't get involved politically that way. But that is, so I totally agree that it's the government's fault. It's because of the policies that they have put into place, which has resulted in uglified American cities. I would even go so far as to argue that the slums, so-called, of the 1960s were much, much better than the slums that you see today. Like you don't see uh, the high number of abandoned buildings, abandoned cars everywhere as you do today. Next point is healthy. So Carlson embraced RFK Jr.'s food agenda, called for universal sobriety, and said widespread use of drugs such as Xanax, Adderall, SSRIs have left Americans half-addled. Yeah, a part of embracing health is you got to get rid of the FDA, and other health organizations have to be disbanded. You could do that gradually if you want, or you can have it, but you should allow for more competition in the private sector, people to compete against the FDA, to introduce alternate methods of safety and testing. And I've talked about this before, how FDA, the drug approval process takes 10 years and $4 billion. And that was like 5 years ago. That's how much it costs. Probably a lot more now. But there is a company that would do far more intensive and many more different kinds of tests than the FDA. And they do it within 2 weeks and it's free. So if you allowed more companies to be able to do that, then why would you even need the FDA? You could just say, oh, look, this company has a much better track record. So therefore, having their seal of approval is better than having an FDA seal. And eventually, no one will care about the FDA. And then you can just simply close the doors for the FDA. And most people know that if you work for the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, when you come out of office, when you're no longer work for the FDA, you just work for pharmaceutical companies because now you have insider connections with the FDA. So the drug companies have connections in the FDA, and they can get heads up, they can influence and do all kinds of shady things. Next, honest. Uh, that's the headline. So honest, the point is honest. Government officials should be punished for lying to citizens, and most classified records, including on the JFK assassination and 9/11, should be opened. Well, yeah, and there's a reason why they're not being opened, and intimated something about this before, but well, we're really talking about justice, which we already mentioned above, right? Lying should be punished, right? You can't lie. If you do it in court, they do it in Congress all the time, and they create loopholes for themselves, like national security, or it's okay. It doesn't matter what you say on the floor of the House. Uh, whether it's right or wrong, true or false, intentional, unintentional, it doesn't matter because you're doing it for a certain reason for the government. No. If justice, enforcing justice, having prioritizing justice takes care of that. But on the other hand, what this point is trying to have is transparency. Transparency of government operations. Like what is going on? What are they doing with our money? And how is their activities influencing our life and our perception of life here in the US of the rest of the world? So if the JFK assassination was actually carried out by the FBI, at least in part, then what does that mean about the FBI? What does that mean about, you know, uh, all of government function? What does it mean about democracy? What does it mean about votes, voting, elections, government officials, and what they're doing for us? All of this other stuff. And so if there's transparency, then probably a lot of this social activism that we see today that fuels, that gives energy to particularly the Democratic Party will dissolve, right? It just won't be there anymore. And when you take away, as I've argued in the past, you take away a lot of this activism, then America becomes a totally different place. And that's what we want. We want that kind of focus on yourself, focus on what you can do to contribute to society instead of looking outward and trying to find targets for your anger and for your confusion. The next point is optimistic. Carlson argued that having children is a biological imperative and the foundation of long-term thinking, while blaming aging and childless elites for policies that disregard future generations. Lindsey Graham comes to mind, of course, because they don't have any children. They don't care what their policies, what the effect will be on future generations. But I hope that this optimistic thing that Carlson is talking about here, like having children is a biological imperative, I hope he's not saying, well, you're required to have kids, but rather family planning is not the business of the government. Right. So uh, that how many kids you have, whether you should even get married, whether you believe in the marriage structure, shouldn't be the business of the government. But restore hope and it's hopelessness, which is the basic problem here. Um, in other words, because there are so many unproductive subjectivities, who wants to have kids? Also, if you are so filled with hopelessness, you're not going to think about marriage or any of this other kind of stuff. And your mind, I think, is heavily affected by this. You're distracted. Now, I've talked to a lot of people, and it's just they're so busy with activism that family life doesn't even really enter the picture. However, if you remove a lot of this activism, you take away a lot of this government subsidy and welfare of propping up education, propping up failed industries, then what you begin to see is more opportunity and more people will want to take advantage of the opportunity, the chance to make their life better instead of just being miserable, complaining about everything and making things worse. Now you see opportunity. And so basically, it's the restoration of hope, right? Carlson wants hope restored, people thinking that the future will be better instead of like right now looking at a nuclear winter. I mean, where's the hope in that? Not there. So let's restore some hope. Next, this eighth point, he goes, wise. Schools should teach how the physical world actually works and what he called unchanging facts about human nature, including innate differences between men and women rather than credentials, screens, and technological fads. Now, I'm sure what he is basically saying is that, unchanging facts about human nature. I don't think that he's saying let's codify and then create this Bible of science that can never change. I don't think that's what he's saying. But rather than sort of trying to normalize 70 different genders, let's just say there are two basic genders, there are two sexes, and how those two sexes express their gender, their sexuality, is something entirely different entirely, right? So, um, what he's trying to wrestle with here is the postmodern legacy of critical theory, critical race theory. So, basically, a bunch of people who are just like the Joker in the Christian Bale Batman, where Heath Ledger plays the Joker and Alfred, played by Michael Caine, he says, some people just like to see the world burn. And that's what I like to how I when I imagine the postmodernists, critical theory, critical race theory people, that's them. They basically just want to see the world burn. While it's burning, they just get to comfort themselves and say, "Well, I was right. See, this all of this is horrible." And so these miserable people who basically impose their misery on everybody else, right? So clean that up. Let's get back to sanity and help the people who struggle with that kind of situation instead of trying to normalize all of that, causing even more confusion. Point nine is decent. The U.S. should apologize and pay restitution for killing non-combatants, reverse Trump's Department of War rebrand, and stop funding allies that commit what Carlson called genocide, citing Israel. Of course, we're talking about the bombing of the school for girls, elementary school for girls, and 100 little girls being killed, then Trump saying these incredibly outrageous statements that they did it to themselves. No, basically, go back to peace, go back to defense. Instead of causing trouble all over the world, let's become people who are of peace again. Recognize what is wrong instead of trying to cover it up so you can continue to prosecute war crimes and an illegal war in other places that have nothing to do with you. It's just so crazy. So decent, yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling that as well. Next and finally, united. Carlson called for halting immigration until the effects of AI become clearer, ending benefits for undocumented immigrants, and making English the sole language of federal documents and ballots. And I'm guessing that, you have to make concessions to the so-called far right, but basically traditional American thinking, the thinking that I had to grow up in, basically. And it has its negative sides, but at the point as a whole, where you're going to try to stop illegal immigration, right, is a positive. So obviously, the whole welfare system itself is a moral hazard, and it should be ended if gradually, right? So 4 to 8 years within a term of a president or the two terms of a president, they have to get rid of the welfare system. The welfare system incentivizes illegal immigration, and all these other problems. So if there is no more welfare, then illegals, they come into this country, they got to find a job. And if there is no job that they can find, then why would you come? Because you'll be living in the street now, right? So you can't come here and then force taxpayers to support you. No, that shouldn't be that way. So in this united point, illegals get nothing. Criminal law or crimes which have a victim must be enforced. And the whole language thing I think is overblown. It just creates the opportunity for some people to hate. Uh, I remember, you know, even in my family, not everyone speaks English fluently. What does that mean? That they have to be kicked out of the country? No. And that's the kind of reaction that you get once you make English the sole language of federal documents and ballots. Hopefully that attitude about federal documents doesn't extend into you know, everyday life. In Philadelphia, I remember there was a pizza place that said "Speak American only, order in American only," and it caused a big controversy, for obvious reasons, which I won't go into here. Now, those are the 10 points, and they will probably be called Nazis for for these 10 points, obviously. But whatever the perspective, the current political system is fundamentally anti-American. And what Tucker Carlson and his group of radicals there, dissidents, as one news organization called them, is trying to be pro-America, America first. So basically, the current system is not America first. They're trying to make it America first. The system we have now is bankrupting Americans for the global Epstein class. Wars are fought for the benefit of the Epstein class. And this is just so wrong. How do we change it? So maybe high profile people like those individuals are the ones that are going to do it. So erosion of basic justice is a huge problem. It's what I think is the big fundamental problem of the United States. There is no justice across the board, from the Epstein class to the so-called fake oppressed, so which results in crime and all this horrible education. And whatever is driving a lot of this illegal immigration, which I can't get my head around, it all becomes moot. It just becomes irrelevant. So make no mistake, though, unwinding this mess. So, and this 10-point plan by Tucker Carlson, make no mistake that it's calling for the unwinding of the mess that's created by the Epstein class. It is going to be painful. It is going to be just totally upending life. Everything that you thought was up is going to be down. Everything that is down is going to be up. Everything is going to get thrown into chaos. And that's because so much damage has been created, so much misinformation, so much misperception has been created by the Epstein class. And so, in economic terms, it's called malinvestment, bad investment. All of that has to be unraveled, all the investment in AI, real estate, the stock market. And when all of that unravels, a lot of people will be affected. For example, if your pension plan, if your retirement fund is tied up in the stock market, is tied up in federal, savings bonds or whatever they're called, 30-year treasuries, whatever, you are going to suffer a lot. But it's like bad medicine, the bad tasting medicine. If you don't take it, something worse will happen. In other words, there is no easy way. There is no simple way. There is no uh, feel good way of unwinding all of the mess that has become created by what I would call incredibly evil people. People who are so focused on their own self-gain, they don't care what happens to the rest of the society or even the world. So with that in mind, that there's a lot of pain coming down the pipe, whether people listen to Tucker or not, there is going to be a tremendous amount of pain. But I do think that the Tucker Carlson route, that pathway, will be a more peaceful way as opposed to outright civil war or revolution. So therefore, the Tucker Carlson 10 points, I don't, there needs to be a lot of clarification, but essentially they're trying to offer some hope. They're trying to offer a brighter future for people. Whereas the way it stands now, there's just a lot of negativity. So maybe there's a little bit of hope here. And at this point, I'll grab onto that. I'll latch onto that. So that's it for today. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next time.